Hey everybody, how are you all doing? I hope everybody is well. This time around, I'm going to be reading a story by a fellow ASMR content creator. Most of you know her. Her name is Joy. ASMR Duck is her ASMR channel. And she very kindly offered to write a story for me to read, for us both to put up on our channels. So thank you very much, Joy. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And I'm just going to jump right in. So without further ado, this is Mustang's story. The thunder rolled across the hills and reverberated down into the valley like some sleepy giant woken from his nap. The black stallion lifted his head and stamped his front hooves with disapproval of yet another storm brewing in his domain. His herd sensed his agitation, and many of the mares raised their heads and sniffed the damp air. No sooner had the thunder sounded than large raindrops started to fall with a heavy thud as they hit the dry earth. Some of the younger foals moved closer to their mothers for protection, as the rain soon pelted down upon the herd with all the force that Mother Nature could muster. The black stallion shook his sodden mane and whinnied to the mares that he was going to move the herd into the shelter of the canyon not far from where they were grazing. Every Mustang in the group set off at a steady pace, but not so fast that the younger foal's gangly legs couldn't keep up with the rest of the herd. The stallion had been the protector of his herd for a number of years, and he had earned high respect by the rest of the horses. His judgment had saved them from capture by humans many times, because the wranglers seemed relentless in their mission to round up the herd. However, the stallion's ability to remain one step ahead of the cowboys had saved them on a number of occasions over the past few years. There was no foreseen reason that this would change today, nor any other day, as the horses entered the canyon to shelter from the relentless driving rain that had blanketed the valley in a gray shroud. Meanwhile, at a rocking lookout not far within the canyon's entrance, Tennyson lightened the corduroy collar of his duster coat firmly around his neck and pulled the brim of his cowboy hat downwards so that his face was protected from the driving rain. His eyes narrowed a little as he watched intently for any sign of movement at the entrance to the canyon. Although he was soon distracted by the drops of water dripping from the brim of his hat and landing on his leather boot, he quickly repositioned his foothold so that the water would fall onto the rock instead. Then, as he looked up once more, he noticed the Mustangs were heading in his direction. Tennyson turned to face the opposite way, and putting his hand up, he signaled to the group of wranglers hiding further along the canyon in a rocky alcove. It was his job to let them know that the Mustangs were heading their way. This mustering operation had been months in the planning for these cowboys, and Tennyson felt a sense of excitement that at last they might have finally outfoxed the black stallion. He didn't seem to mind the driving rain anymore, even though, as he turned his head to face the other men, droplets of rain had managed to find their way down the back of his collar, and cold water was now trickling down the inside of his shirt and onto his bare back. The fact that the wind was blowing from the direction the horses were advancing meant they were unable to detect what lay ahead of them. The cowboys took up their positions hiding behind the large rocks in wait for the horses to pass their location. The men had already erected a large wooden enclosure at the far end of the canyon to prevent the Mustangs from escaping out the other entrance. All they needed to do now was ensure their mounts remained as quiet as possible, so the black stallion did not sense them lying in wait before the herd had passed them by. Tennyson made ready to move as well. It was his job to make his way down to the canyon floor and come in behind the herd so that he could round up any strays that might find their way back through the cowboys' cordon. He quietly walked over to his buckskin mount, Outlaw. She had been waiting patiently behind the large rocks which lay by the winding path that had led up to Tennyson's vantage point. He had lived all his life in these parts, and he was very familiar with the nooks and crannies the canyon offered up as good hiding positions. The seasoned cowboy swung silently into his saddle and urged his horse forward at a slow walk down the difficult, narrow track. He knew he would have enough time to reach the canyon floor by the time the Mustangs had passed the rest of the men. The pathway had several awkward turns that an average mount would find hard to navigate, but Outlaw was not an average horse, not in any sense of the word. Tennyson had owned her for 12 years, and he would trust his life to his Mustang's judgment. That was the reason he was so keen to round up the herd now. In Tennyson's opinion, the ability of the Mustang outweighed any quarter horse he had seen. Not that many of his co-workers at the cattle ranch would agree with him. However, no one had a bad word to say about Outlaw, because she had put many a cowboy's mount to shame at the local rodeo. When Tennyson reached the bottom of the canyon, the sodden pathway in front of him was entrenched with many hoofprints of varying sizes. The cowboy clicked his tongue against his teeth and urged Outlaw forward at a canter. He could hear shouts ringing out from the men, including several cuss words mixed in with the sound of pounding hooves and frightened neighs. Then, as he rounded the next corner, the reason for the men's cussing became clear, because the black stallion, along with several mares, were racing towards him at a full gallop. The seasoned cowboy grabbed his lasso just in time to throw the noose around the stallion's neck as he made for an escape. However, the 3 mares that accompanied him carried on past them, heading for the entrance to the canyon. Tennyson, in that split second, had thought the mares might stay with the stallion when he was caught. However, he didn't have time to think about the lost mares, because as soon as the rope tightened around the black stallion's neck, he started to rear up menacingly towards the cowboy and his horse. Outlaw had been taught to stand firm when a lasso had been thrown by her rider, but with the stallion's hooves flailing around her head, all the mare could do was step backwards quickly to try to stop the other horse from striking out at her. In all the years that Tennyson had spent around horses, he had never seen an animal act as loco as the black stallion was acting in that moment. He had no fear. As he kept moving, horse and rider backed away from his thrusting hooves. But there was no way this old cowboy was going to give up and let such an amazing animal free. Now that he had the stallion in his grasp, Tennyson had the overwhelming desire to harness this animal's energy, even if it took him all afternoon to calm the stallion enough to be led to the corral. The Mustang's ears were pinned firmly back as he lunged at Outlaw with his teeth bared. Then, as if something deep within the buckskin mare's brain was triggered by the stallion, she reared up unexpectedly, sending Tennyson rolling off her back and onto the muddy ground. The cowboy instinctively covered his head and rolled away from the horses as the stallion advanced towards the mare once more. Outlaw had never acted in this manner before, and all Tennyson could do was try and stay clear of their hooves while he tried to scramble to his feet. The black stallion had no way of escaping the lasso, which was wound tightly about the saddle horn, So when Outlaw decided she had had enough of the stallion's threatening behavior and made for her escape, the stallion was forced to gallop after the mare, as they headed in the same direction the other mares had made for their freedom. In frustration, Tennyson took his hat off his head and threw it in their direction as they disappeared out of sight. Now he had not only lost the black stallion and several mares, he had also lost his own mount. Could this day get any worse? The cowboy walked slowly over and picked his hat up off the ground. Mud and water dripped from the rim while he shook it to try and clean some of the dirt away. There was nothing for it now. He would have to make his way towards the other men on foot and hope that someone would give up their mount so he could go and find his horse. The rain had stopped, but a cold wind blew from the north. Its chill stung at Tennyson's cheeks like icy daggers. He didn't seem to care as he strode quickly to reach the rest of the group. The other men had managed to capture most of the herd, and they all seemed mighty pleased with themselves. But as soon as they saw Tennyson walking towards them, they fell silent until he told them what had happened to him, and more importantly his mare and the black stallion. Old Jack was the first to speak when Tennyson had finished relaying his story. "That black stallion is just plain crazy. He charged us down the minute he realized we had him trapped. It was almost like he knew Sonny was the most inexperienced rider, because he headed straight for the lad like a steam locomotive on its final journey to hell. Thankfully, we managed to prevent most of the herd from following him, but we had our hands full enough containing this lot. We figured you would have been able to round up the stallion and the few mares that escaped with him. I guess that local horse had us all fooled." "Yes, well, he ain't gonna get too far tied to Outlaw's saddle, but I need to get to them fast before they make too much ground on me. Who is willing to give up their mount so I can find my horse?" Tennyson asked. There was a quiet murmur among the other cowboys, and soon Sonny walked forward with his palomino and handed Tennyson the reins. "Seems only fair I let you take my horse, given I was the one that let the stallion escape our cordon in the first place. Buster might not be the fastest horse here, but he is willing enough." Tennyson nodded to the young cowboy, and he wasted no time swinging into the saddle and taking off at a gallop back the way he had come. The thunderstorm had passed, but it had been helpful because the wet ground made it easy for the seasoned cowboy to track Outlaw's shodden hoofprints mixed in with the wild horse's tracks. The open prairie was vast, and they could have gone anywhere, but Tennyson was pretty sure that Outlaw would be heading for home as long as the black stallion would not stop her progress. Sure enough, the hoofprints seemed to be heading in that direction. Although the prairie was relatively flat, there seemed to be no sign of the Mustangs. Tennyson followed the prints for some distance, and then he suddenly pulled the palomino up when the tracks seemed to fall back on themselves. It seemed the black stallion had decided he had quite enough of following Outlaw, because there seemed to be a change of direction. It looked as if the black stallion had taken the lead, and Tennyson's mare had no choice but to follow him. The cowboy's eyes narrowed as he looked in the direction the horses were now traveling. It seemed as though the stallion was leading Outlaw back towards the canyon. But how could this be so? Tennyson had not seen them heading in this direction. Very soon, however, he realized where they may have disappeared. There was a ravine about a mile up ahead. Surely the black stallion had not taken Outlaw there. Even for a horse which was not tethered to another, navigating the terrain down through that area was a very dangerous exercise. Tennyson urged his horse into a full gallop as he raced towards the ravine. As he drew close, he could hear frantic whinnying, which seemed to be coming from the very place Tennyson had dreaded he would find the horses. It was then that he spied the black stallion on his knees at the very edge of the ravine, but there was no sign of his buckskin mare. Tennyson got down from the gelding, who was now breathing heavily after their hard ride. The black stallion eyed the pair with a wild look in his eye, but he was unable to make his escape or even stand up. The reason for this became blatantly clear to the cowboy as he slowly walked toward the edge of the cliff and looked down. Outlaw was riding with her front legs on a narrow ledge and her back legs dangling precariously on the branches of a tree which grew out from the side of the cliff. If it had not been for the noose about the black stallion's neck, she would have surely plummeted to her death at the bottom of the ravine. Her frantic whinnies were followed by the black stallion as he snorted while trying to get to his feet. Tennyson was in a total dilemma as to how he was going to save his mare, when the only thing holding her in place was a lasso attached to the wild Mustang. Given the cowboy was on his own, and it would only be a matter of time for the stallion's energy to be spent before he would not have the strength to prevent himself from being pulled over the edge as well. Tennyson decided the only option he had available was to throw another lasso around the stallion's neck and attempt to get Buster to pull them back up from the cliff. It was a sketchy plan, but the only hope of saving Outlaw. Tennyson took the lasso from the Palomino's saddle, and he started to swing it back and forth while he stepped slowly towards the black stallion. He could see every muscle rippling through the Mustang's ebony coat as he drew closer to the horse. The stallion fought to stand up again, but the noose about his neck had his head pinned close to the ground at the cliff's edge. The cowboy didn't waste a moment longer than he dared, and with pinpoint accuracy, he threw the rope over the stallion's outreached head. With the stallion unable to escape, Tennyson managed to fix the ropes about his neck so they would not tighten further and cut off the animal's air supply. He then hurried back to his mount. Slowly he moved backwards one step at a time until the slack of the rope tightened, and inch by inch they started to drag the black stallion away from the edge of the cliff. Outlaw could be heard whinnying in fright as she was drawn upwards. However distressed she was sounding, Tennyson was pleased that his plan seemed to be working. The black stallion did not seem to resist, and once he was pulled away from the cliff's edge, he made another attempt to stand once more. Tennyson held the Palomino steady while the stallion got to his feet. He staggered for a couple of steps. Then something deep within the animal took over, and he pulled back on the rope, which in turn brought Outlaw into view at the top of the cliff. He pulled back again, and finally her whole body was clear of the edge. Tennyson got his horse to hold his position while he dismounted. But this time the cowboy had learnt his lesson. He took up the rope from the saddle horn and tied it around a nearby large rock. He then swiftly moved past the Mustang stallion, who was standing there, his sides heaving hard with all the energy he had used in pulling Outlaw free. Tennyson ran his hands firmly over the frightened mare, but apart from a few scratches and being shaken, she seemed to have got off very lightly from her harrowing ordeal. The cowboy untied the rope from Outlaw's saddle horn. He almost chuckled to himself as he did this, because he could remember the other wranglers telling him he was wasting his money buying such an expensive saddle. However, he was sure if he had gone for a cheaper brand, he could have kissed goodbye to his horse. The horn would surely have ripped from the leather trunk had it not been such a finely mastered piece of saddlery. Once he had done this and taken up Outlaw's reins, he led her away from the cliff to stand next to Buster. Then he turned his attention to the black stallion. As he drew close, he saw the fear in the Mustang's eyes, but the creature had lost all his fight. He stood there with every muscle in his body trembling. However, he made no move to try and escape the rope that had him tied to the rock. It was then, in that instant, that something took control of the cowboy's heart. He had the black stallion in his grasp, and yet he felt an overpowering urge to set the Mustang free. He owed the horse that at least, for saving the life of his mare. How could he break the spirit of this animal when the Mustang had been so strong in stopping Outlaw from falling to her death? Tennyson took out a knife from its sheath, and slowly he drew close to the stallion. First he cut the loose rope that had been attached to Outlaw's saddle, and then he did the same for the lasso that was holding the black stallion tethered to the rock. Once the horse realized he was free, he turned and cantered away. Outlaw neighed softly to him as he left, and Tennyson smiled at her. "You have had a very interesting day, girl, but we need to get Buster back to his rider and you home for a few days' rest. I doubt we will be seeing your black stallion again for a while. He will be staying well away from the canyon, if I can read his mind." Tennyson was quite right in what he said. From that day forward, the black stallion and his small herd of mares were only seen from a great distance. As soon as he saw a horse and rider, he would move his herd away as fast as he could, but he never turned them towards the canyon he had come to hate. However, Tennyson didn't mind in the least, because almost 11 months to that very day, Outlaw gave birth to the most beautiful black Mustang colt the old cowboy had ever seen, apart from only one other horse, who was indeed his majestic sire, the black stallion. The end. I like how Joy puts the end at the end of her stories. The end. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that story. That was good, Joy. Thank you for writing that. I enjoyed reading that for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. And let me know if you would like me to read something else. I appreciate your comments, and if you take a second to like my video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.